We're training our staffers, like we're going to pop the hoods on the inner lives of these students who come to us. And what are we going to do with that sacred responsibility, right? We have a moment to step in a way that maybe no one in their life has up to this point. How are we going to steward that relationship, whether or not they walk away loving Jesus, which obviously our cards on the table, we hope they do.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. This show's available on Apple, Google, Spotify, Edify, Liftable, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like our show, please take a moment to review it on your favorite platform. That lets more people know what you like about it, and then the algorithms start to do the rest. More people find out about it. We have 3 times as many people listening to the show as when we started, and it's thanks to you. I'm very grateful. So on this show, we talk about the importance of worldviews and how they change everything. And my guest today is Kasey Leander. He's recently joined the team here at Summit Ministries as the leader of our Eastern U.S. program held in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. Kasey was a Breakpoint contributor for the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. Now he is on the Summit conferences and events team. And Kasey is passionate about applying the answers of Jesus to modern life, answers that are emotionally, existentially, intellectually satisfying, but that can occur in regular conversation. Kasey studied politics, philosophy, and economics at Taylor University, studied theology at a program through Oxford University. He's even interned at the United States Senate in Washington, D.C. So I'm really excited to have Kasey on the Summit team and really glad to welcome him to the show, where we're going to talk about a surprising thing, the rise of faith in the younger generation. Bet you didn't think that was happening. We'll see if you change your mind in the next 45 minutes. Kasey Leander, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
Dr. Jeff, what a privilege to be here with you.
I am going to love this conversation. I know this already because we've known one another for a long time, and you recently came to work for Summit Ministries as the director of our Summit programs in the Eastern United States.
Oh man, I'm still on cloud 9 about it, to be honest. So I'm thrilled to be stepping into this role.
You know, that is a position that I once held back in the day.
Right.
Yeah, that John Stone Street once held back in the day. So no pressure, but.
Yeah, right. Big shoes to fill for sure. Yeah.
Well, I love the fact that you are going to be a full-time director for the Summit in the Eastern United States, because we've had that program for a long time. We used to meet at Bryan College and we met at Union University. Now we're settled in at Covenant College in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. Beautiful location. And we'll have 600 to 800 students who are studying with us there this summer, which is a tremendous breakthrough. So it's fun to have you on team.
I'm so excited. And, I have a special place in my heart for Covenant. My wife works here, and we met because one of her colleagues introduced us at a super awkward game night that I was driving through Lookout Mountain, and they said, come on over. It might be someone worth meeting. So we walked in. We knew that they knew that we knew it was a setup. But I mean, always and forever, even if life moves us on from this particular location, I'll love Covenant for that, at a minimum. But it's a great school and a great place.
Yeah. Well, we've loved our time there on the campus, and it's one of the rare places in the United States of America where it feels like Summit in a way, because the centerpiece of this campus is this antique hotel that has an extraordinary story. You're up on top of the mountain looking down on the valley. You can watch the sunrise over the valley on one side, watch the sunset over the valley on the other side, and feel like you're in a really special spot.
Absolutely. Right. The antique hotel connection does make it like extra special.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. Except I think you guys had Marilyn Monroe stay at your hotel. We never had her stay at the Grandview Hotel.
A fun piece of trivia about Carter Hall, which is the central antique hotel, and I can't remember what they called it, maybe the Lookout Mountain Hotel, but they almost filmed The Shining on this campus before they chose an alternative location for that iconic horror movie. And I think the Covenant folks were like, I think we'll probably pass on having our location as the scene of this brutal horror film. But they almost picked this hotel here at Covenant.
That is so funny. Oh, that would be so bad for promoting Summit for 2 weeks for students.
It truly would. Throw a wrench in the system. So.
Yeah. Well, when you came to Summit, we want to hear a little bit of your story. You were writing for Breakpoint. So anybody who's heard the Breakpoint podcast or the Breakpoint daily radio show, they've heard stories that you have helped to author and bring to light. And you got into that through a whole series of other things too. Just tell a little bit of your Summit story and how you got to where you are.
Man, yeah, I attended Summit as an 18-year-old, and I rocked up to that hotel. I'd heard a little bit about it, but a family friend so generously said, "Hey, I'd love to send you to this 2-week-long apologetics conference." I had parents who really modeled what it looks like to love God with your mind. So I think I had a relationship with the Lord, and I had an appetite already for that kind of learning. But what I always say Summit did was it just made it like supremely cool. Have just never been around that many young people, like people in their 20s who I looked up to. They're just a step ahead of you, but they like loved reading. They loved books. And it was like the best question you'd ask everybody. What are you reading right now? I'd never been in that kind of a environment before. And I think it just poured gasoline on the fire for me, Dr. Jeff, honestly. And that metaphor actually is pretty inappropriate also because my session, there was the Waldo Canyon forest fire that came roaring over the hill almost. It almost burnt Summit and all of Manitou Springs down. So I actually spent half of that session evacuated, learning in the nursery room of a local church, right? Amazing story there. From there, I went off to Taylor University. I studied politics, philosophy, and economics. And that philosophy piece kept grabbing my attention. And so after college, a buddy of mine had heard about this 1-year program, partly through Oxford University, partly through an apologetics ministry. And you go to Oxford and you learn, it's like a boot camp for evangelism through apologetics. And that program is called the OCCA, the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. And from there, I got launched into a really intense season that lasted several years after that through a job and onwards of being on college campuses, talking about Jesus with people who were like radically skeptical. Our goal was to find the hardest boiled skeptics and ask them what they believed about God and what their objections were to Christian belief and just try to woo those people into the kingdom. So I had an amazing stretch with that ministry. Some just incredible stories of watching God move on college campuses and a lot of just practical experience and stories of people who you approach them with a tract and then you leave an hour and a half later having had one continuous conversation and you hug and you pray for them and just like amazing moments where I feel like for me that just showed how spiritually hungry people actually are and how this generation actually is longing for answers to their biggest questions, right? And when you approach them, even if you're a random stranger with a tract and inviting them to some, talk that night, sometimes you end up in conversations where people like bare their souls to you. From there, you're right. I got the amazing opportunity to jump in with John Stone Street and the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, thinking through current events, helping Christians know how to respond to the news. So many good things to say about that and my former colleagues there. I think my favorite takeaway piece was outrage is not a strategy.
Wow.
We would say that to each other, almost on the daily because we're just saturated in the news. But when we think about how the body of Christ responds, there are some things that are evil that must be opposed. But there's a whole lot more in this world, actually. There are good things we can protect and we can celebrate. There are missing things that we can innovate. And there are broken things we can restore and reconcile to the Lord. And so I think, that was an amazing season too. So
Yeah. Well, of course, we love Breakpoint. John Stone Street's a regular speaker at Summit Ministries. We've been friends for decades and just love and support everything that's going on there. I haven't apologized to them yet for taking you away and bringing you to Summit Ministries.
I said, John, if it was for anything less awesome, I wouldn't go. I just wouldn't go. But, when your dream job calls, you say yes.
Yes. Yeah, and it just gives us further opportunities to work together. But it's going to lead to a conversation that I've been wanting to have with you for some time. You mentioned, of course, I love the strategy you have when you're writing. How do you avoid just creating outrage? That is a huge part of the media component today. Make people so mad that they will sit through the commercials and you'll make money. Right. And then it just ends up with people being so angry at one another. It doesn't feel like, for a lot of people who are watching and listening, we would have any hope. What hope is there? We can't possibly agree. We can't even talk to each other anymore. And then you've got the rising generation coming up, seeming, and this is the impression that you get when you watch enough of these reports, seeming to be clueless about their history, about what's good about America, about their faith, about anything else. And this is all leading us to an impression that it's a lost cause, that we might as well just acknowledge the fact that not only is there an unbridgeable gap between the right and the left, but there is an unbridgeable gap between older people and younger people.
Absolutely.
We need your help. We need your help to bridge that a little bit. And I would love for you to share. You mentioned already the spiritual hunger that you saw on college campuses. But one of the things that you've talked about and written about is the surge of faith among young adults. And I'm sure there are people watching and listening. They're like, "Oh, sure, yeah. This is going to take about 5 seconds. This is not really truly happening." So, man, we got our work cut out for us in the next 30 minutes or so. But I want people to have hope that leads them to action, not just optimism, not just a positive feeling, but actual hope that we feel like we can act, we can do what God's called us to do.
So beautiful. Yeah. I share that passion. And so about a year ago, not quite a year ago, when we covered this story, so Claire Ansbury with the Wall Street Journal back in May of last year published this on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, talking about a surprising surge of faith in Gen Z. What she found was that 1/3 of 18 to 25-year-olds say they believe more than doubt the existence of a higher power. Now that's up from 1/4 in 2021.
So in 2 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a surge in actually teens who are saying, you know what, I actually do believe in a higher power, in the existence of a higher power. I believe more than I doubt, I guess is the specific wording of that. Because other times they might say, yeah, I still believe, but often I doubt. Right. But actually, this is a cohort that's saying, I believe more than I doubt the existence of a higher power. And so, yeah, there's some surprising news there. And I think we saw it as a challenge and an opportunity. When you really dig into that statistic, Dr. Jeff, and, you know, it's interesting. I feel like I'm talking to the Jedi Master here because I know you're so deep in the research yourself. But we wanted to provide some context with that, with some Barna research, right? And so the good news is that, right, there's an increase in more belief over doubt. There also, teens right now seem to be less negative about sharing their faith than millennials. 81% of Gen Z, at least on paper, repudiate the belief that if someone disagrees with you, it means they're judging you. So that was fascinating to just take that Barna research and hold it up next to the Wall Street Journal. It seems like more openness. And for context, in 2019, Barna ran a landmark study, in my opinion, or a groundbreaking for me, just to read this headline. In 2019, Barna found that 1/2 of millennials think that evangelism is wrong. Millennial Christians, like dedicated, going to church, millennial Christians think evangelism is like actively wrong. Now, again, it's like a lot of different statistics from a lot of different studies, but yeah, it does seem like there was a shift that the Wall Street Journal was picking up on in terms of spiritual openness with Gen Z.
When I think of evangelism, I know what you're talking about. We talk about this at Summit a lot, how you engage people, how you dialogue, you press into relationships in a truthful way, rather than just saying, well, this is the brutal truth, take it or leave it. But talk a little bit about when you use the term evangelism, what's going through your mind?
Oh, man. I think that's a great question. I think I take Scripture seriously when it says that we're made in the image of God. And there's a quote from George MacDonald, who was C.S. Lewis's literary mentor. And George MacDonald said, "He who is made in the image of God must know him or be desolate." And I think evangelism for me often looks like uncovering reasons for why people feel that desolation tugging at the corners of their hearts. They know something's wrong with the world as it's been presented to them, where they create their own truth and they're the center of the universe. I think all people know that that's wrong. We know we shouldn't actually be in that. We might like that idea at times, but when push comes to shove, we know we shouldn't actually be in the center of all of existence, right? And it doesn't matter how many times people tell you that. It's like a doctor who you go in, you're feeling ill, and the doctor just says, "What are you talking about? You're fine. You're perfect just the way you are," right? We might want to hear that, but sometimes exactly what you want to hear isn't exactly what you want to hear. Mm-hmm. And so, if people, we would usually just lead with a question. And I think the wisest Christians I know usually lead with a question, right? What do you think about God? Have you ever been burned by the church? Now, that's actually, a lot of Christians are afraid of that question. But if we really believe there's a God-shaped hole in the center of every human heart, that actually might be the entree for people, the entryway for people to actually start opening up. And once you build that warmth and that relationship, they know this isn't a shouting match. I think many people would be surprised at how like people's story actually is ready to be shared at that point.
Walk us through a little bit what that might look like. So you were on America's top college campuses. You were on the campus of MIT and places like that. So the students you're walking up to visit with are in terms of just raw intelligence, fluid intelligence, they are the smartest kids in America.
Absolutely. Yeah. When
you walk up to them and, you're a kid from Colorado, you've got great training, but, I can imagine that it would be a little bit, wow, this person in front of me knows more about physics than I could learn if I had 3 lifetimes to learn it, and they're 19.
It's so true.
Right? So talk about what happens. How do you start the conversation? How does the conversation often go? Because I want us to get a clear picture of the spiritual hunger that you're talking about.
What we would do is set up specific events designed at tackling the hard questions of faith. So we in some ways had an edge there in the sense that people come and they know they're going to be talking about God. So to then ask them, hey, what do you believe about God? They might not have been expecting that, actually. They might have expected to be preached at. But to have a moment after the talk or whatever, we try to keep it short, 35 minutes, little Q&A. And then, hey, Christians, go ask your neighbor who sat next to you, what were they thinking during that talk? Get the real, honest to goodness impression. So that was the mechanics of it, Dr. Jeff. But man, to be honest, I think what you find is that intellectual knowledge alone does not lead to a fulfilling life. And, I was so intimidated too, because I took a job with this ministry that we were with when I was 23, I think, or maybe 22. Like I had my bachelor's degree in politics, philosophy, and economics, like a bite out of each of those. And I think I tried it like David putting on the armor, Saul's armor. Mm-hmm. Like, I need to wear all this heavy stuff, man. Like, they're coming at me. I just got to be ready, put on the Saul's armor, like get ready to just like duke it out with people. And I think it was after I used a Jean-Paul Sartre quote wrong at an MIT event. And one of the students was like, actually, I think you're misrepresenting the context of Sartre there. And I was like, okay, like checkmate me. And so, like if you know some good stuff, I think that's helpful. But I think I was reaching hard to be like, I got to be impressive. And the fact is that the gospel is impressive. It's convicting. It's sharper than any two-edged sword. And I think by the end of 4 years of that, I think I realized like not only are people just people, and a lot of these students, their main question in life is, will someone love me, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe their path there is, I'm going to get the very best grades of all time so that I know people will love me. And you find out quickly, I learned this at Oxford, how hollow of an answer that actually is, and how the core of reality that God put in our hearts is relationship. And so if you can offer that, by the end, Dr. Jeff, I was convinced that the janitor mopping the floors at MIT could have walked in that room with the gospel in his heart and the Holy Spirit as his ally and had just as effective of conversations as I was having, like easily. So, I mean, to me, that was the most encouraging. That's when it started to get really fun, if I'm being honest. When I took off the Saul's armor. Again, not that learning doesn't matter, but just like bring what you have to the table, right? And the Lord is like ready to use it.
I think there are some people, when they've been trained in evangelism, they sort of arrive at the impression, which is hopefully not the intent of their trainer, that if someone doesn't bow their head and pray a prayer after you and acknowledge Jesus as their Lord and Savior, then the conversation was a failure. I'd love to have you talk about that a little bit. I really think the fear of failure is what keeps, when I think about my conversations, the fear of failure, even today, is what keeps me from bringing up tough things.
Preach it, right? Jesus, someone put it this way, and it stuck with me forever. At the end of time, God will not look at us and say, "Well done, my good and effective servant." Right? And he also won't say, "Well done, my good and famous servant." He's going to commend us for one virtue, and that's faithfulness. And Chuck Colson even had a plaque on his desk. I know John Stone Street tells this story all the time because it's so good. Chuck's plaque said, "Faithfulness, not success." And in my mind, Dr. Jeff, like when I would approach, we do a training session for the Christians first because we want them to know, like, look, we're gonna try to crack open the door here. But you got to step through it with us because these are your friends you've taken the risk of inviting to this whatever lunch and learn on is there evidence for the soul or something. We needed those Christians to be filled with the fruit of the Spirit, and the fruit of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. Like those are attractive traits in people. But I think you're so right, Dr. Jeff. What held them up was feeling like a used car salesman, where like they're on commission with the Lord. If they don't move a certain number of cars off the lot, they're in trouble with the big boss. And that'll just corrode your love and your joy and your peace. Not to mention take the attention off of the person you're talking to and put it right on yourself, which is an awkward way to converse with anyone, in any situation.
I'd love for us to have some questions in our back pockets for the kinds of conversations that we might have at work, on the bus, on the train, with friends, wherever we happen to be, that can move people toward talking about spiritual things. And I'll tell you why I'm asking this, Kasey. Somebody asked me the other day, I was in a Midwestern state, how do you even start these conversations? Like, how do you talk about spiritual things? And I just thought, well, I live in Manitou Springs. If I ask any person, do you ever think about spiritual things? I'm guaranteed a good conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not true in a lot of places.
Right.
So how do you sort of bring up the important things?
I think the first step, Dr. Joe, I'm so tempted to just ask you that same question, but I'm not going to do that. I think the important thing for me is, Jesus says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so if what Christians have in our hearts is guilty legalism, we're afraid, we're not spending time with the Lord because we know he's mad at us because we haven't evangelized enough. We haven't met our quota. If that's in our hearts, what's going to come out of our mouths? Guilty, weird legalism. The timing will be wrong. Our tone will be wrong. We'll ask weird questions. We'll get weird answers. And you could do it all right and still have some awkward moments. So that's not what I'm saying at all. But I do think if we're right with our Savior, like if we know Jesus is sitting next to us on that bus, and a bus is like a pretty extreme example. How about the coworker at Starbucks that they don't know you're a Christian yet?
Yeah.
Right? Hide it under a bushel? Yes. Like so many Christians are like, do your coworkers know you're a believer? And they're like, I'm getting there. I'm like, how long have you worked at that job? Like 8 years. Like, come on. And Christians get weird with our responses. People are like, what'd you do over the weekend? We were at a men's retreat. Okay. But we'll be like, got together with some buddies and sang some songs. It's like, just say you went on a men's retreat with your church. Like, be honest and let people know you're a Christian. Like, hopefully that leads to, I think the golden rule there is just authenticity breeds authenticity. Mm-hmm. If we want people to be authentic with us, how can we have a real relationship with them if they don't know what we're all about? You don't have to ram it down their throats at that point. You just have to be real about your life as a Christian. Church is an important part of our walk as believers. We shouldn't be embarrassed about it. We should be honest about it. And then, Dr. Jeff, I got to credit you because your lecture in 2012, the one that I took with me the longest, was about asking questions.
Oh, wow.
And you told a story about when you were in the room with several of your heroes, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And you wanted them to remember, I need to go back and maybe just have you tell it, but you wanted them to remember you. And you asked them one question, time and money aside, what would you rather be doing? And each one of them, I remember you told us, shook your hand as they left that dinner, right? They had such a good impression because not even because of the question you asked, but you're a question asker. And there are so few question askers in this world that if Christians can just be authentic, have a heart that's right with the Lord, and then just be someone who even asks questions in the first place, I think those spiritual conversations are guaranteed. They're all but certain to come up over the course of relationship with people.
Did you know that only 1% of 18 to 29-year-olds hold a biblical worldview? That means that 99 out of 100 young people you meet are held captive by counterfeit truth. But that's exactly where Summit Ministries steps in. We train over 65,000 students a year to form and to keep a biblical worldview for the rest of their lives. The transformations are remarkable, and they're lasting according to our 1-year, 5-year, and 10-year alumni surveys. But I need your help to reach more of these spiritually hungry students. Listen, for just $33, you can sponsor an hour of training for a student. And that hour can make the difference between spiritual life or death. So when you become a monthly partner, I'm going to send you stories of the students you've created opportunities for. And they're going to bless your life. And as a listener of the Dr. Jeff Show, I know you care about the rising generation. Will you help them through Summit? To donate, go to summit.org/equip. Summit.org/equip. And as a thank you, I'm going to share with you a curated collection of lectures, interviews, and videos so you can see for yourself the worldview shift that students are receiving. That's summit.org/equip. Talk to the parent or grandparent who they look at their child or grandchild and say, yeah, I think, when I see these studies that if more and more students are nuns, they don't have any religious preference. Yeah, I think they're in that category. So obviously we love them. We want to have a relationship with them. But are there, there's an elephant in the room. How do you bring it up? How do you talk about matters of faith when that's kind of the last thing the person seems to want to talk about?
Man, yeah, I think that's such an incredible question to ask. And, like everybody, there are family members that I have who I am praying for and would love to see come to know the Lord. And I think we got to remember just exactly the principle we were talking about earlier, which is faithfulness, not success. Oftentimes with family, there's so many wounds, there's so many unresolved tiffs or conflicts or dynamics from when we were little that just, we haven't examined. And so I would never claim to be, any kind of expert on that. Dr. Jeff, it's like we're all walking. I think so many faithful believers have that. They have a family member, a child that they're walking through with. But it seems to me like the fruit of the Spirit are going to be our best lead in that conversation. And sometimes the fear in our heart is to crack a box on interpersonal conflicts that maybe have less to do with the gospel than we think they do and more to do with our relationship or our dynamic with that person that isn't fully healed. And I take comfort from Jesus' example there, where he ate with the tax collectors and the sinners, and the Pharisees even, before they acknowledged him as Lord, and regardless of whether they did at the end of the day, right? Nicodemus. Jesus spent a whole night in the middle of the night talking with Nicodemus. He wasn't afraid to invest the time. And so I think there's an example we need to follow there, where we need to lead with actually our actions, right? We can convince a stranger on the bus. With our own family member, they need to see the gospel changing our lives.
That's really humbling. But you've just illustrated that DNA double helix that we talk about at Summit all the time, truth and relationship having to intertwine. That the platform for truth is relationship.
That's right. Yeah, that's so true. And I think I see it demonstrated so well at Summit. We're training our staffers, like, we're going to pop the hoods on the inner lives of these students who come to us. And what are we going to do with that sacred responsibility, right? We have a moment to step in a way that maybe no one in their life has up to this point. How are we going to steward that relationship, whether or not they walk away loving Jesus, which obviously our cards on the table, we hope they do. Mm-hmm. But something I appreciate about that Summit DNA is that there's clarity in the relationship. At the end of every conference, right, in Colorado, I know they say, some of you thought you were coming to, horse camp and you were going to ride ponies around. And unfortunately, you're stuck in a lecture for 60 hours, this week or whatever. Just that step of like saying, I see you. If you don't want to be here, I see you. Like, I acknowledge that, right? You're not giving away the farm with that acknowledgement or compromising your message. You're honoring the relationship by putting yourself in someone else's shoes and anticipating their needs. I just think that's a beautiful culture. I'm excited to keep implementing that in Georgia in the ways that we've already had previous generations of staff do it.
Yeah, I love the way you're speaking about that. It is a sacred responsibility that we have. We have so much influence. You've got people standing up they got doctorates in this or that. They've written books. How that comes into the lives of students, how it shapes them then, is something that we've put a lot of thought and prayer into, because we can't control the outcome.
That's right.
We get the opportunity to walk alongside. I tell you, the greatest freedoms I've ever had in my life, spiritually or otherwise, are when I give up my right to control the outcome. Like when I say, I can't make this turn out the way I want. And so I just need to relax and be faithful and present in this moment and walk alongside.
Man, yeah. That's so beautiful.
Well, think about how Jesus did it, right? A buddy of mine came to breakfast one day and he said, did you know that of the 3 years of Jesus' earthly ministry, for him to go every place the Gospels say that he went, he would had to have been walking along the road all day, every day for 13 months. I'm like, you actually calculated that? You are such a nerd. But that's a super powerful impression. What does God do when he comes in the flesh? What does God himself do when he comes in the flesh? He walks alongside.
Right. And Jesus is like, I don't do anything that the Father doesn't direct me to do.
Yeah.
And my dad, who's my spiritual hero, always points this out. Sometimes Jesus rests. And how many people does he actually walk by on his way to the Mount of Olives, in order to just rest with the Father? I mean, that's a sobering thought. When I'm tempted to just work or try to control the situation, how much time Jesus spends actually just going to the Lord, going to his Father in prayer.
Well, I know we're going to be putting this broadcast out as people are thinking about what they would really like for their 16 to 22-year-olds to do this summer. I'd love for you to speak to them. Maybe somebody's listening and they're trying to figure out how to get their friend to come. maybe somebody's listening and they really want their son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter to come. I'd love for you to speak to them a little bit about why this 11 days this summer, not at some random possible point in the future, but this summer could be so shaping in their lives.
Oh, man. What a great setup, Dr. Jeff, because I'm going to say, send them to Summit. I mean, we'll take them. I think it's worth, and I'm sorry that we're just now getting to it. More context for the Wall Street Journal survey is striking me, actually, because while they found this openness in Gen Z, they actually found that it's a generic openness, right? And so it doesn't mean they're more orthodox in their beliefs. They're actually less orthodox than previous generations, but they're more open. And the author of the Wall Street Journal article concluded that they might be turning to the same comfort previous generations have turned to during tragedies, referring to the COVID-19 epidemic, right? But different researchers have also emphasized if you treat faith as a secondary question and you approach it with sort of a quote unquote light touch, right? Like we'll just let them make up their own minds. What it practically communicates is faith is a back burner issue, right? And not that making up your own minds is wrong, but just that like hands-off approach. Let me just let my friend or my children be catechized by whatever happens to float into their line of sight, during the day or on their social media feed. So I would say the solution to that would be to emphasize catechism of our young people and say, whether or not you agree with the gospel, these are some of the biggest questions you could ever spend your time asking. Why not actually take that question and that quest seriously and get some specificity on those answers, right? Don't leave it at openness and curiosity. How about take some time and investigate the actual comparative worldviews? Now, I think Summit does that amazingly, but man, I would love to see that attitude translate to the church as a whole, where we don't treat our faith like something that's just going to happen by osmosis. My dad, when I was 13, took me aside and said, son, your mom and I love Jesus, right? And I did know that. I had accepted Jesus into my heart when I was 4. But he surprised me. He said, we don't want you to love Jesus just because we love Jesus. We want you to love Jesus because he's real, because his message is true, and because God is real, and the evidence actually points in that direction. And he slid a book across the table at that point. It was Norm Geisler and Frank Turek's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, right? And it was kind of a baptism by intellectual fire, where at 13, I'm trying to wrap my mind around the Kalam.
That's a big book.
Cosmological argument. But I'm telling you, Dr. Jeff, it set the tone for my Christian walk. And right there, truth and relationship. I think my dad was like, we'll love you no matter what you decide. You're our son. But spend the time, take the time. So the pitch I would give, obviously to parents is send your kids our way. We're going to have a blast. We're going to rock climb. We're going to kayak, but we're going to call each other to something higher and better. Can we just take 2 weeks and spend them thinking about ideas that are going to impact us for the rest of our entire lives? To me, and I can say this as an 18-year-old, it was like the best summer of my life getting to do that. So good that I came back to basically get paid peanuts and staff and wash dishes in the back of an antique hotel just so I could be in that environment again, right? It's powerful and it's beautiful. It's not exclusive to Summit. This is just the gospel that we're bringing, but there is something special about the culture God has allowed to be raised up with Summit. So man, send those kids our way. And if they're skeptical, that's just as good. We'd love to meet them. We'd love to spend time with them, to ask them those questions and hear their answers.
Yeah, what I often tell parents is we're looking for people who are curious, where they're starting off, whether their faith is strong or not. Are you a curious person who likes to learn? If you can answer yes to those questions, then you're going to find that Summit is a home for you. This is your tribe.
So beautiful, right? And that's just true. By God's grace, we'll keep that culture thriving. So I'm encouraged by the staff we have applying this year. We're right in the weeds of the staff application process. And by the way, I'll just put this out here. If you are 19 to 25-year-old or older who has a passion for this, send us an application. We'd love to see your name pop up on our staff application form. So there's a chance to give back. Right.
Love it. Love it. What are you looking for in the staff? What they need to obviously be something, there needs to be something unique about them if we're letting them be in relationship with all these students who've been entrusted to us.
I think the biggest things we're looking for are a love of truth, right? Truth and relationship, a love of God's word, a love of the truth, an openness to following that truth in a bunch of different fields. Curiosity is definitely helpful. But then wisdom in interpersonal relationships, I would say, is something we try to cultivate. And we try to grab from among the applicants those who show real interpersonal wisdom in terms of listening and asking questions. I would say those are the two biggest things. And it's a beautiful process to actually read and see that there are so many young people. There are so many Gen Zers. Our staff give me the most hope on a daily basis, just reading their applications and hearing their testimonies.
That's a great point. So if you love truth and you love people enough to want to listen to them, learn from them, walk alongside of them, then we want to hear from you. We want to partner with you. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Come on out.
Man, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm proud of you, Kasey. I'm grateful for you being part of the Summit team. I'm looking forward to being there. Georgia, myself, I think I've got 4 days, each one of those 2-week sessions that I'll be there, which is unfortunately these days is the longest I ever get to spend in one particular place. But I'm really looking forward to that.
Thanks for spending it with us. So Lookout Mountain is almost as good as the Rocky Mountains. It's more of Lookout Hill. Don't tell anyone, but they also have an incline here, I just found out. It's not when you run up, it's one that the train is still active on. So anyway.
There's an incline and there's an ice cream shop at the bottom. So once you ride to the train, you ride the train to the top, the train does all the hard work, then you can get ice cream when you get back.
Come back and treat yourself. You've earned it at that point. So you've sat on a grueling train ride.
That is hilarious. It is a beautiful spot. We love getting the opportunity to go up there. And I'm just thrilled as I think about the lives that are going to be changed through Summit this summer. Yeah. Well, if you're watching or listening and this resonates with you in any way, go to summit.org. You'll see all the information there about applying for these programs. If you know a young person who is a demonstrated leader, then you want to actually look at the phone number on that page and call us, because funds have been provided to help you honor their leadership initiative that they've already taken by inviting them to a 2-week experience at Summit. And if you need financial aid, if this has been a tough year for you, and I know it has been for a lot of people, and you'd love to have this for your son or daughter, but it's just, these are tough times, would you call us and talk to us as well? Because we don't want anybody to miss this experience just because they're going through a tough season. Kasey, thanks so much for coming on the show today. I'm really grateful.
Dr. Jeff, thanks so much for having me, and looking forward to seeing you over the summer.
Thank you to my guest, Kasey Leander, for coming on the show today. If you want more resources talking about apologetics and the truth of Jesus in a biblical worldview, please visit summit.org/resources for free content to help equip and support you. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. If you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student or reach the next generation as an educator, church leader, or parent, head over to summit.org/resources to find out about the programs, the articles, the videos, the ebooks, and more that we offer. Also, if you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. Download it at edify.app, spell EDIFI. And then you can also search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.